Well, folks, welcome to the Contractor Commute with Ben and Kinsey. Today, we're talking about why most contractors ballpark bids.
Yeah.
And ballparking is something that I have done as a contractor. And we see a lot of people in our space serving contractors with software that do a lot of ballparking.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about why ballparking is bad. And so we give a lot of rough estimates for what things will cost.
Sure.
And, we want to talk about, is this healthy for your business? Is it dangerous? And if we're going to do something about it, how do we change from ballparking?
Yeah, that's good. And is it healthy? Yeah, healthy for your business. I think that's a huge topic. I got a bid a couple weeks back. Actually, our neighbor was having some painting work done to the exterior of their house. And so we were like, we have like one spot on the brick spot or something on our house that we were like, maybe we should get a bid from that guy since he's in the neighborhood, that kind of thing. So had connected with him and got a ripped up envelope. And I'm not trying to say this to bash by any means. Like it's hard. Bidding's hard. There's time, time on the job, things like that. But as a homeowner, I got, a ripped in half envelope with some numbers just thrown on it. And the details on it were power wash, prime and paint, brick fence, both sides and top. 2 guys at $60 an hour, estimating 8 to 10 hours, and then anytime ASAP. So like that was the bid I got. And so then for me, receiving that, I'm like, well, that's nice that he bid that and can do it ASAP, as a homeowner. I'm like, those are perks. But then I'm like, okay, are we buying the paint? Who's buying the paint? There was just so much unknown with the bid that I got. And I also didn't know if I was like, okay, is 2 guys $60 per hour each? Or is it for both? So there just was so much, as the homeowner in this example, there was so much just lack of clarity, I guess, for me, which just obviously didn't give me the confidence. We haven't painted our brick yet. We haven't found, it wasn't that big of a, I guess, pain point for us. But anyway, so we say all that, just to point to the fact of the benefit of not ballparking, right? Like that was so ballparked of like 8 to 10 hours. I don't even know if that's accurate, as a homeowner. So I just lacked a little bit of confidence with actually like moving forward with that bid.
And this is something we see all the time.
Sure.
I mean, to various degrees. That's maybe an extreme example.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Back of the napkin, quite literally.
Yeah.
While someone was on the toilet, needed some toilet. Okay, here we go. Here's your bid.
Right.
Not that far away from that.
Sure.
But we do see a lot of just generic bids, and I think a lot of that stems from the fact that as a contractor, we look at things from our perspective of we do this all the time. We have a lot of experience with it, so it seems very simple. We look at something, and he looked at your fence and said, that's approximately 8 to 10 hours.
Seems simple.
We do this every day. No problem. And there's also an element of unknown for him in all of that. Is it really going to be 8 hours, 10 hours? What if he discovers something different from that?
Sure.
So you both walked away with
lack of clarity.
Lack of clarity, yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of pride. I noticed that a lot of the contractors that I've worked with, you talk to somebody that's been around it for a long time, and he was so good. He walked into a job, and he looked at the walls and space. He didn't even have a tape measure, and he said, it's going to cost this amount of money. So as a senior craftsman to a junior craftsman, they look at that as almost like he was really, really good.
Yeah, very experienced.
Yeah. He just knew what it should cost, and so there's some bragging rights involved with that. Sometimes we're right. Sometimes we're wrong.
Sure.
And, from a customer's perspective and all of that, though, which is what you brought up, is this lack of confidence that guy has any idea what he's talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Because did he really even care? It seems very unprofessional to a lot of customers for you to just walk in without a tape measure, without any type, and just throw a number at it.
Sure.
So suddenly they're, the peers might be, they might be impressed.
Sure.
But the consumer
might not
in that context is
Sure.
not. And if you're working commercial context, certainly that's not winning you jobs.
Yeah.
And I've heard a lot of customers' response to that of saying, nobody's that good. Nobody can just walk in and tell me that's what it's going to cost.
Yeah.
Cost for what?
Right.
And, bathroom, somebody walks up, that's about $25,000. So
Like
they're
what if
ballparking, right?
Yeah.
They're ballparking a number. And I think it can be really dangerous.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. So maybe let's talk through just like why people ballpark. Like what's the reason behind ballparking bids, I guess, from your perspective?
Well, we're busy, and it requires a lot of work to put all the items in there.
Sure.
And also, there's a double-edged sword involved with that, because if you don't get it right, and people are judging what you put in there, so you put in 50 line items and say there's 75, you miss some. People are saying, well, you should have just done that.
Yeah.
And so I think we don't have enough time. So therefore, well, let's just throw a number at it. It's faster. We can guesstimate. Maybe we'll be right. Maybe we'll be wrong. Let's throw a bigger number at it. So maybe that'll cover for the things we missed. That's the typical mindset, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think it just sort of translates into this, I also have to bid, but how do I balance with fulfilling work, getting stuff done?
Yeah. Maybe too, like the context could be like, oh, I'll just deal with it later. Like if I actually win the job, like I'll just cover that with change orders or things like that as part of the project. Maybe it could
That's a
just
good
be
point.
like, well, let me just delay the time
Mhm.
until I actually know what it's going to cost,
Yep.
or did
Yes.
cost,
Yes.
and then just bill out change orders. But then that introduces complexity
Mhm.
later of like, well, are you tracking those,
Right.
tracking those things, So I think that, we'll speak into probably some time element to some
Mhm.
of this in a little bit, but it's time either way, whether it's
Yes.
upfront or later, So if you're covering it in change orders, there's time involved in
Mhm.
sending more change orders
Yep.
versus bidding, So
Or maybe even an opportunity cost involved with all of that, where you put this number on it and you realize you're not able to capture money down the road because you're so vague that someone says, well, you should have just included that in there. And how many times have we heard somebody say, well, they discovered a rotten floor, which nobody knew about, but the contractor just felt like, well, I need to just take care of that because the bid was so vague that someone said, well, didn't you just kind of plan on that? It's an old bathroom. What did you expect would be there?
Yeah.
And that kind of speaks to the point of a lot of times we don't want to be judged in this very detailed-oriented bid. Customers are going to be nitpicking it and saying, well, that didn't happen that way, so therefore you should be giving me a credit, and this happened this way, and it costs more money. That doesn't count, right? It's always kind of, there's the concern that if I did put all this time into it, is it even worth it?
Yeah, does it even matter, right? Like that whole context of like, what's the actual value and putting together all the work? Is it actually important to know, what goes into it? So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think, being that this is the framework for a project, I think we can just sort of to your point, shortcut it, get through it quickly as possible, and see what happens down the road.
Yeah, that's good. Good insight.
Yeah, so why does the bid matter to our customer?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons it matters. I think we touched on a few of them. I think one is, ensuring that your customer knows what's actually included, adding the detail as part of that, like at least in a homeowner context, that's what I would care about, as potentially our listener's customer, right? And then I think also a bid is your first impression. I mean, aside from them meeting you for the first time or talking to you on the phone, they're gauging, making impressions along the way about your business. And there's research that shows that people make a first impression of someone in 7 seconds.
That's pretty quick.
So
you don't have much time.
You have 7 seconds to like earn trust, essentially, or provide value, or and I guess, and it's kind of that silent thing, right? First impression is like, it's not necessarily even like at the forefront of somebody's mind, but it's like, hey, that impression is in there. And so like, for whatever reason, if you're not instilling a positive first impression, like, what you're doing, have detail in the things that you're bidding, it can hurt your impression and of your business and of your brand. So.
Yeah. In that 7 seconds, somebody's judging your bid in that same 7 seconds of the back of the napkin, or wow, these people know what they're doing.
It's kind of scary when you like put it in that time frame. Yeah. It's like, man, you got to have it together, which again, it's kind of just a call to greatness kind of, episode I think that we're trying to have, of just like calling people to maybe a better place of like, think about impression, think about business, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So.
We do think of things from our perspective so many times. Yeah. And we're busy, and what matters to me or matters to you might be two different things. Sure. And same thing with contractor consumer kind of relationship. Yep. What matters to the contractor is not the same thing that matters to the consumer. So to be aware of the fact that people are making these assumptions and judging us based on what we're giving them is important.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Really good point.
Yeah. And I mean, just knowing what something will actually cost is something that really matters to a consumer as well, because when they know with confidence, to your point, we're providing the paint, this is what the paint costs, and maybe not even breaking it down to that level, but when that level of in that 7 seconds they get the idea that you know what you're doing, and that you know what that thing costs, and you're not just guesstimating. Or I remember grandfather always talking about, I want somebody to make money on the job, but I don't want them retiring off of me.
That makes sense.
And so many people look at the $50,000 bid that you give them and say, whoa, $50,000, and they just assume $25,000 of its profit.
Sure. Yeah.
They don't know. They don't know.
The customer doesn't know the cost either.
They don't.
Right.
Yeah. And you're not helping them either. So, I mean, I think they're just like that. We're helping educate the consumer. We're helping educate our customer about what something should cost and why. Yeah. And if it's 2 lines, how are we providing that to them?
Yeah. It's a really good point.
It's just here we go, get work done.
Yeah, sure. It's super vague.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So let's take it a step further. Talk me through why ballparking should matter to our audience. Why should it matter to contractors? The idea of ballparking or not doing it. We said earlier it's dangerous, right? So talk us through why that.
Yeah, why is it dangerous, right? I mean, the bid, the estimate, the quote, the proposal. I mean, these are specific terms in different contexts, but very similar. We're setting the groundwork for the project. This is the source of truth document that means a lot to our customer.
Right.
They're going to refer back to it, whether that's a commercial big project or a tiny little, handyman type job. They're looking back at what did you say you were going to do and how much it would cost. And they're going to hold us accountable to that document. And so this is the groundwork for it. And when there's lack of specifics, it's vague, it's not really thorough. We're being held accountable to that.
Sure.
And there's interpretation involved too, because somebody's gonna look at that and say, well, I would have assumed. And so we need to take the assumptions out of it. So the reason why it matters is we need to make sure that the assumptions are the correct ones. And when there's two lines involved on a more complex project, we've seen $100,000 jobs that are one page of detail. Yeah. And it's not even like it was one crammed page full of stuff. It's just a few line items.
Sure.
And just saying, hey, build kitchen.
Right.
What kitchen?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And so I think that's a big problem. And also the other aspect of it is when you have a very thorough, accurate bid, it protects us from the person that we shouldn't be working from because we address the assumptions. Somebody might assume that we're building them a very high-end thing for a low price point, and that might not be at all what we're saying we're going to do. But when it's the build kitchen type bid, suddenly we can really convey something that we didn't intend to.
Yeah.
And then the other point is really making sure we make money on jobs. I mean, you can't really do that if you don't know what your costs are. And I think, as a business, one of the key distinctions between a business and a charity is one makes money.
Right. Yeah. It's a valid point.
Right. Exactly. If you want to run a business, you need to make money.
Right.
You need to protect your profits. And in order to protect your profits, you need to understand your costs.
Sure. Yeah. That's good.
So ballparking really insulates us from knowing our true costs. It just says, you know what, we're going to do it approximately there. And it gets us into a mindset, right, of just being like, stuff is just going to cost a certain amount of money. And we don't learn anything from that either.
Yeah. If you're ballparking, you're not learning. Yeah. That's a good point.
I have a friend during the whole COVID price increases. He runs an electrical company, and he's a very experienced, and not just experienced as an electrician. He's a master electrician, but he also knows what he's doing as far as running a team. He's just a great guy. And he told me he very nearly lost his shirt when all the price increases went up because, and I'm not saying necessarily it was ballparking things, but they made some assumptions about what things would cost. Yeah. And by not having the mindset of understanding true costs and always monitoring that, they made some assumptions about, okay, well, an outlet should cost $110 to install. And when that went to $180, they started losing money on things. Yeah. And so this mindset can be very dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk me through, we've talked about how, why it matters. Yeah. We've talked about like what it even means. And why people do it. But maybe talk us through how to avoid it, right? Like practically speaking, how do we avoid ballparking bids?
Yeah. There's a really useful purpose for ballparking in the sense of qualifying somebody initially. And I think we need to make that clear distinction when ballparking. This is not something we're presenting to somebody. It's not the final bid. We're just telling somebody a certain type of project should cost in a range of dollars. Right. And that helps us educate the consumer, like we talked about before, educating our customer about here's how we look at that project.
Right. Well, educating and deciding they get to have some stake in, this is way out of line. Yeah. Like maybe we're not a good fit from a customer standpoint anyways. We mentioned that a little bit ago, but if you're ballparking, it fits in that qualifying context to your point.
Yes.
In order
to scare them off.
Exactly. Yeah.
100,000, if there's it's not even close, then you're like, okay, that ballpark eliminated somebody we shouldn't be working
and maybe
for.
you're referring somebody else who fits within that, you know what I mean? Like that can help build your brand too. Just
that's a good point. Right. So. We're not your person for that job. And I at one point I would think about something of like finding the ideal customer, but it's less about the ideal customer. It's about finding the pairing because what's an ideal customer for me and an ideal customer for somebody else might not be the same thing. Yeah. Oh, we might have a different niche that we're really pursuing. So the other thing, I think the thing we have to be careful of is avoiding ballparking bids, and this whole theme is we can also ballpark but provide detail at the same time. And I've made that mistake. So a lot of line items, lots of details, but when it came down to the numbers, I was ballparking. So it's not just about 2 lines versus 100 lines. It's how we came up with the numbers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. We've talked about why it's so dangerous, obviously. And I think one thing to note is like if you're doing it today, if you're ballparking bids today, you've mentioned a mindset shift. There's the cost of change, I think, as part of like, how do you stop doing that, right? It's kind of what we're conveying today. Like we're saying, hey, there's a better way, is essentially like kind of what we're getting at. But be prepared if you're trying to change the way you're doing things and you believe in kind of even what we're saying, I guess, that it's true. There's going to be some time and some work involved in making the change and actually understanding your costs, to your point, and that mindset shift. And I think too, like so many people in this space, it's such an entrepreneurial space. And I love that about construction. And I think, but with that comes, okay, a contractor's wearing 15 hats that in other businesses might not be true, And so, it's going to require diligence and time, to actually make time on your calendar, make time in your schedule to figure your costs, at the end of the day.
I think I want to sell this even one step further because we look at this as being an optional thing a lot of times. Like ballparking is an acceptable solution because so many people are doing it.
Right.
And I think we assume what is the harm. We talked about it earlier. We can sometimes assume, well, yeah, I'd love to have a thorough bid. I'd love to go to that step. I'd love the result of that.
Sure.
But at the same time, we might not see the need as much as we need to. And to that mindset shift, sometimes it requires a little bit of pain.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to me, running a business, scaling a business. And at some point, it went from ballparking worked, sort of. I didn't feel the pain of it as much, to scaling a business. And ballparking was very, very detrimental. Sure. Because suddenly there was too many things to track. There was too many things going on. And so I think even if you're in a small business, having the right mindset, even if you're not necessarily experiencing pain from it, just the peace of mind and knowing, this is what my true costs are, and I'd like to make 15% profit, and I can protect that 15% profit is just so relieving.
Yeah.
And also when you go to the customer, this whole, are they cleaning up on me? I mean, like, are they just retiring off my job? You can speak to that even very clearly. I remember that shift happening of going from the ballparking bidder to, like the very, concise and clear contractor, of just being like to be able to say, this is what my costs are involved here. Here's my profit line item.
Yeah.
And here's what you're going to pay me to do this job. And they'll be like, oh, you're making 12%.
Yeah. And you can sell that.
Oh, man. And then when somebody came along and said, hey, I'm going to do it for half of that, I put the question mark in that side of saying, well, are they doing the same work?
Yeah.
Because I told you what my costs are. And here's what my profit is, what I'm making on your job. And then they can say, well, that's a very fair margin. So what is the other guy doing?
Or not doing.
Or not doing. Yeah. Right.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, while you're talking about this, something just kind of like came to mind of like, maybe there's some general contractors that are like listening to this too, from like a bidding side of things. Like typically a general contractor's, getting bids from other people.
Yes.
I wonder, like, is there a way, just like briefly, I know that this wasn't even something we talked about before, but it just came to mind. Is there a way to kind of encourage, or as a general contractor, to encourage the people that you're getting bids from, subcontractor bids, obviously, for the line items that you are, to provide more clarity, I guess, in a way that doesn't tick them off too,
It's a great point, because some of the general contractors that I've worked with, in fact, I was just talking to somebody last week about this, and he felt like every time he was getting a bid back, it was just a stab in the dark number. And he was frustrated by that. And he's just said, I want somebody to tell me what those costs are. I don't want them just cleaning up on me because times are good. I want them to be able to have where he could understand that. So he's the customer in that case. As a general contractor, you are the customer to your subcontractor.
Yeah.
They want to make you happy because they realize that's where the work comes from. Next job you have lined up for them many times.
You have two customers, essentially.
Yes, right.
So,
yeah, right. You have, the end result, the end, the customer you're trying to serve, and then the general contractor is the liaison between you and the person that's really paying for the work.
Sure.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Where a lot of times that lack of confidence is conveyed to the general contractor. So 100%, encouraging the team, your subs to say,
break it down for me.
Yeah, break it down. And that way there's not a lot of change orders either, because a lot of times, that's not covered, or you're getting billed later. Sure. And it's probably a whole nother theme in managing that side of it, but it is a great point.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
That's good.
So let's just talk about like course correction too, because switching from a mindset of I'll ballpark, I'll just throw numbers out there, to something different than that.
Right.
You talked about mindset shift. there's a little bit of work up front involved. And I think
sure.
it can be scary
Yeah.
because it seems like very overwhelming. I don't have the time to break down everything down to the, how many nails I'm going to need for something,
for
right?
sure.
It just seems like that's just too much work. I can't
Right.
do that. So what other resources are available to me? So I think breaking down what you do as a business and say, what are the tasks that what are the themes? If you're a flooring contractor or if you're a framing contractor, or a trim carpenter or a plumber or an electrician, you do a lot of the same things over and over again.
Right.
Asphalt guy, whatever, concrete guy, you do a lot of the same work.
Right.
So being able to the point earlier of, are we learning? Ballparking prevents us from learning.
Yeah.
Whereas if we're able to start breaking those assemblies down and start saying, okay, well, this is the cost of labor, this is the cost of materials, and start breaking the cost breakdown of the assembly is really, really important. And I think that gets missed in cost books. Cost book data comes back and says, here's what something should cost. Based off of what, where?
Yeah, it doesn't show you how.
No,
right? Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's just saying, in general, this is the range of numbers you should be charging, which can be a helpful reference.
Sure.
It's sort of like the dictionary of just being able to say, okay, well, this is what it's not even a dictionary, right? I mean, maybe that's even a bad analogy.
Well, just something to gauge like what the number you came up with.
Yes.
Right. I mean,
does it fit between the lines?
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
Right. Is it level? Is it fair? But at the same time, you can be led wildly astray with cost book data and what's a part of that assembly. So starting to break things down of saying this is what something will cost. I kind of jumped around a little bit here because the overhead part about it is even probably number one in all of this is really what does it cost to do business? The cost of labor is something that so many people get wrong, and it's not a knock. It's just, it's so hard sometimes to factor all of these things we don't think about every day. Right. We pay a guy $20 an hour, $30 an hour, $40 an hour, and we just, okay, well, that's the cost. But when that guy's on vacation, if he's salaried, he's got paid time off. So that needs to get factored in somewhere. There's taxes, there's insurance, there's the cost of inefficiency. The guy's not always on his A game. So a labor calculator is really important. What is the true cost of labor? And then in really making the time, you spoke to this, Kinsey, of just being able to say, what are the, where are those, being prepared for kind of the initial upfront costs, being able to set aside time to do it. But once you do it, you can get better at it, improve upon it. Even the first version doesn't need to be perfect.
Yeah. You'll save time later if you just sit down and do it, right?
Right. Yeah. Block off the time, start getting it done. Yep.
That's good.
And then I think once you understand the true cost, then you'll know where the profit margin is because it's everything, hard costs, overhead, and then you're adding a profit on top of that.
Yeah.
And that's the mistake a lot of us make when we're bidding is to be able to, we just say, oh, well, the profit is somehow included in all of that. No, that's after everything else is added up, we're putting a profit margin on.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I think just to even like pause and just say, we want to just encourage the people who are listening really like to this and just say like ballparking is totally normal. Like if you're doing that, I think we touched on it earlier, but like it's totally normal. But just because a lot of people are doing it doesn't mean that we should keep doing it, right?
Yes.
Like we should. There is a better way. But it, as we've said, it takes time. It takes effort. It takes diligence. But the result, which should matter to everyone, hopefully that's listening, the result is that you'll actually know if you're going to make money, right? Like that's the whole goal. So, as we kind of wrap up, do you have any final thoughts for people listening?
I've been on both sides of this equation. As the contractor that's just thrown numbers out there and I've lost money on projects, I could stay home and make more money than losing money. And that's painful. And I've been on the other side of it as well to present something. And I think it requires some change. It requires a little bit of pain to get into that mindset of, I really want to be thorough. I want to be accurate. I want to put together something that wins. But I think the customer experience is so much better. The groundwork for the project is really exciting for your customer. You're helping educate them on what's happening in this project.
Sure. Your
source of truth document becomes something that actually it's meaningful. And suddenly you go from this fearful, not knowing mindset to being enlightened. You're not in the dark anymore. You know where you're at as a business, where you want to go, and goal setting becomes fun.
Yeah.
Now suddenly you're saying, okay, here's what we want, where we want to go as a business. And that opens up a whole new world to you as a contractor when you move away from ballparking bids to really being this correct bidding process.
Yeah.
And I'd love for us to get into this more down the road of just what that process could look like and maybe getting some thoughts from people that have mastered this process as well.
Yeah.
But it is so freeing to get to the point of, wow, I know where I'm at as a business. I know where I'm going.
Yeah. That would be a healthy place to live, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
That's the dream, right? Like that's
really
why that's why people get into the space. We hear it over and over and over again. Time, money, freedom.
So true.
Gotta
So
make
true.
sure, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's so good. Thanks for those thoughts. I think we'd love to know what people want us to cover. So like
Yes.
comment on podcasts,
Please.
comment on YouTube. Let us know what you'd like for us to kind of dive into a little bit more. And then obviously like, comment, share, subscribe. And we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, everybody.